What makes a pure abstract a pure abstract? Well, essentially, it's the absence of two things. And no, those things are not theme or players. Yes, abstracts tend to be non-thematic, but not all. Think chess or Santorini. And they tend to be two players, but not all. Think Battle Sheep or Hey That's My Fish. Those are really just dominant trends which reflect the players these sorts of games attract, and the games they choose to play and promote. They are not prerequisites. What makes these games a distinct class of games are the absence of random elements and hidden information. There are no dice rolls, no hand of cards. Everything in the game, including everything that is coming up, is known to all the players before the first move takes place. Technically, a game could have trackable information, but I've never actually seen an example of one. I was partly inspired to start off this particular series by a list on Board Game Geek of interesting numbers for abstract games in Board Game Arena. And so I decided to go and have a look at all the abstracts that are currently on BGA. And this is a sample of them. And there are a few of these: Abalone, Battle Sheep, Blooms, Chess, Hive, Reversi, or as it used to be known, Othello, Patchwork, Jiangqi, which I have played, but there are a lot of games that I've not. And these 32 are nowhere near all the games on BGA at the moment, even if you don't count games that are in the alpha or beta stage of development. And I wanted to kick off a little series on them, and I'm going to start with Connect 4. So how is this going to work? Well, having selected the game, I kick off one turn-based game to make sure I get the rules. And I also record some information about the game on the day I first had a go at it, particularly the ELO rating of the 20th ranked player. I suspect that's a good indication of the depth of study that the game is receiving. Connect 4 is a solved game, so I'm expecting that to be quite impressive. And the number of games occurring on the day I started. How do I then proceed? Well, that first game will be my chance to read a little bit about the game if it has some existing theory, which Connect 4 does. Once that game is up, I will start one game at a time up to 10 games. Those 10 games are my shot to get to 100 ELO. Board Game Arena works a little weirdly in that 0 ELO is really equivalent to 1500 in a normal game. You can't go down in ELO if you're below 100. So essentially, you're trying to get up to 100, and then from there, the system monitors your general performance. Once I get to 100 ELO, I'll join a tournament or something similar if one is available. Connect 4 is an example of what are called MNK games. Games played on a grid, 7x6 for basic Connect 4, where the player needs to make a row, column or diagonal of a certain length, 4 in the case of Connect 4. The simplest MNK game is Noughts and Crosses, which is 3x3x3, which plays a pivotal role in the finale of the 1983 film War Games, which if you're my age you'll remember, and if you're not you should go and watch. The point in the finale of that film being that Noughts and Crosses is a fairly dull draw. So different MNK games generally have wrinkles in the rules which are intended to make the playing of them more interesting. In the case of Connect 4, that is the drop mechanic, which means that columns and rows work differently. You can play in any column, but you must play from the bottom row up. I'm going to keep a record, as I said, of all the games that I played, which will always be turn-based. Connect 4 is a solved game. The 6x7 board, the solution for that is well known. BGA offers a variety of other board sizes, so I take advantage of that. I'll note which variant I'm using, the ELO of my opponent, and whether I was the first player or not. In this case, I kicked off a new game each morning and a new game each time an existing game finished, because I could power through these fairly quickly. If a player had a game available, I generally took that. As you can see, Connect 4 players are quite prompt players. but also I am frequently encountering relatively new players. I have some high elo opponents in that list as well, and it's notable the impact that has. It was much harder to win a game or even to achieve a draw against an opponent once the elo got over 200. At the end of that, I had an elo of 285. Let's talk a little bit about the basic tactics of Connect 4. What you're trying to do is set up a diagonal or horizontal set of 3 that can be turned into a winning line of 4. Once you do that, you close that column to the opponent. Here, for example, yellow cannot now play in column 7 because doing so would immediately result in a win for red. You keep trying to set these up in different columns until eventually the opponent has no choice but to play in such a way that they cannot avoid giving you a win. To do that, you try to create situations where the opponent is forced into playing in a column to allow a win. So yellow has just played in column 2 and has created a winning position here. The point is that they can win by playing the second or the third piece in the 4th column, D2 or D3. So if red does nothing, they just play in column 4 and win. But if red blocks by playing in D2, then yellow plays in D3 and still wins. Once I had 10 games underway as my initial intro, I had a check and there are 4 tournaments currently available. You might notice that all of this took place back in May, and obviously the hiatus in the channel meant that I didn't actually do anything with it until I restarted things recently. There were 3 turn-based. The main thing to look at with any tournament is timing for players. You don't want to enter a tournament giving each player only a day and a half of thinking time. Most of those games will end by timing out. So I registered for the one with 15 days thinking time, which was due to start a week later. But that never actually began. It never attracted enough players to kick off a tournament. This is one of my games, one of the 10 games I played against Urzagi with yellow to move. And it's illustrating a little more of the basic tactics. And also some issues with the endgame. Playing in column D is a losing move for either player. The opponent will then immediately play at D2 and connect 4 pieces. But assuming there are no winning moves elsewhere, whoever is ultimately going to be forced to play in that space is in Zugzwang. That is, they would rather not make a move. Well, it's yellow to move at the moment and fill 1 space, then red to fill a second space. So if there are an odd number of moves, it's going to be yellow and an even number red. Counting, there are 5, 9, 10, 12, 17, 26, 35 moves in other columns, plus the losing move itself, which is 36. Ugh, that's even. That means it's me, red, that is going to be forced to play there. 36 moves from now. Okay, this position is a little bit more complicated than that. There are actually 2 losing moves. Column G is also a losing move, as G2 wins for both yellow and red. Barring a serious error, there is no way to win in any other column, which makes the count 5, 9, 10, 12, 17, 26, plus the losing move is 27, an odd number. So that should now be a win for red, me. But you still have to play out 27 moves to get to the end result. Note, I'm not strong enough to be 100% certain of my analysis here. I have to play these sorts of things out. My opponent has an elo of 470, but at this point has not offered to resign. So either they think I'm weak enough to blunder, or, more likely, they are not strong enough to be certain the game is lost either. And I think in general, this is a weakness in these types of games. It's not ideal to have to play out long, tedious endgames. It's much better if a point arises where even modestly competent players can see the position is hopeless and call the game, or where the game itself actually ends at that point. My opponent did eventually reach the same conclusion I had, but only after we had played another 20 moves. Counts can get complex, but they are central to the play of the game. Here a play at C2 is a loss for either player, a play at F3 is a loss for yellow, with yellow to move. There are 3, 5, 8 spaces available, to which we need to add the losing move itself for 9, which is an odd number. And an odd count means your opponent will have to play in that spot. Had it been an even count, it would have meant I would have had to play F3, my opponent will survive, and given that the subsequent count would then be for me to have a loss, I'd be in Zugzwang and I would have lost the game. Again, my opponent did eventually concede, but only half a dozen moves after this point. This is important. Counting the moves is not just a convenient etiquette for the end, though it does make for tedious endgames. It's the core of good play. So people ought to spot this much earlier. I think it's interesting that they are not doing so. There is a book by James Allen, one of the people who solved Connect 4. In case you're wondering, the actual game that's sold in shops is a forced win with perfect player for the first player, as long as they play in the central column. I do not know how increasing the board size alters things, but there are several articles by Yamaguchi on different Connect 4 variants, offer solutions for them either being wins or draws, etc. They're all behind paywalls, and I wasn't going to pay Springer for article access. I also wasn't going to lump out £50 to £70 for a copy of Alan's book, so I didn't end up reading any of these. Note that there are traps for the unwary in the beginning. Take this position with red, or as Alan calls them, X, having played in E and D, and yellow, or not as Alan calls them, playing above those. Red has now won this game, and it's not immediately obvious why, because normally you need 3 pieces in a row to be forcing, but the bottom row is a little bit different. Here, once you have 2 pieces, if you play a third, you create a 3 with both ends open, whereas on higher rows, when you create a 3, usually only one end is open at a time because the stacks have to get up to it. Having said which, this is not actually ideal play by either player. There is a whole opening theory with the game which suggests red shouldn't have played for this in the first place. Anyway, I'm planning to do a series of these videos and play through different pure abstracts on Board Game Arena and give my general thoughts on all of them. My quite superficial thoughts on all of them, because the honest answer is it takes thousands of games to get remotely good at anything. But for today, here endeth the lesson.